Welcome.
Yeah.
My name's Mary Coss, as you probably already know, and I'm from Seattle, and I'm an artist that has been working in sculpture and installation my whole life, and I do a lot of public artwork, and my work is based in society, culture, the things in our lives that matter and that are real to us, and I strive to make work that is very visceral and that speaks to everyone in some way. I tend to use forms that are recognizable from our lives in order to give an access point for people. But I also like to abstract them and walk kind of an edge of metaphor as a way to get them to think maybe a little differently about those objects and what is there. So I have, for many years, been doing work about gender and the female experience, and all of my work is around issues of social justice. A lot of it is based in very human issues of relationships and things that matter to us about identity. So a lot of the work is about identity. And just to give you a little background on how this work got started, I was involved in a show on cultural, how our personal cultures affect our art practices. And I was working with a Chinese friend and a Japanese American friend. And we were exploring how our cultural differences affected the work that we were doing. And during my studio time, I got really ill and I couldn't work, and I really wanted to move this forward and get something done for the show. So my mother had given me some software on genealogy, and I had never done anything like that before, but I thought, well, this could do with cultural inheritance. So I started looking into my roots and finding what is that identity that we, as so many Americans from European descent, have lost connection with. And so I started digging into this, and I found that I've always been compelled to live by the water, and I've moved from water source to water source, and that generations my ancestors had lived on the water, which was interesting because my friend from Japan that I was working with, all of her ancestors lived inland in the middle of the countries. And anyways, I felt like this was a compelling connection that I had with my past. So I built this huge shell that was that you could walk into, that was lit, that had the sound of ocean crashing, and I wrote a poem called Blood and Water that was about my past and my ancestry. And in this process, I was collecting names. So that work really gave birth to this work, which is this work is called Traces, because the one thing that I found is, as I was looking for my female lineage, every time I would find another name, it was actually just the father's name. So it's like chasing ghosts in a way, that you just keep looking for that name, but then it's still part of the patriarchal chain. So I started writing these women's names as far as I could get them out of wire. And what you have here I have about 150 of my foremothers here flying through the air. And after I had made that shell, I was really enjoying this idea of making large sculpture that's lit inside with a frame. So this was the next step in that body of work. And this sculpture is an upside-down pelvic bone, and it's called Vow. And I started collecting wedding gowns from the local resale shops. And there's 13 wedding gowns cut up in here. I was telling Peter yesterday, it was really interesting. I was tagged in a Facebook conversation, ended up finding that there were some students of mine that were discussing where they were today and how their early art classes had impacted them. And one of them was talking about that she was now doing costumes for the opera. So I hired her to come and help me figure out how to do this, because the show was a little easier, but this was getting really complicated. So I learned how to drape, and basically we upholstered or tailored these with the wedding gowns. I thought that I would flip the pelvic bone up to how we usually look at it and do a quick sketch over there. That's that wire drawing. And the other piece of this project is the sound, which is off right now. But it's, I have 2 daughters, and I thought it would make sense to include them in this piece about lineage. And they're both musicians of sorts. One is a rhythm tap dancer, and her practice is all about percussion. So I took her into a recording studio, and I had her tap to a heartbeat, and I recorded that. And then I sent those recordings to my other daughter, who is a professional jazz musician that lives in New York, and she does a lot of composing. So I sent those to her, and I asked her to create what would be like a life cycle. So do like a 7-minute loop that starts out with just the heartbeat, and then progresses as we progress through life. Okay, Peter's gonna shut off in a minute. So what happens is it becomes very intense. In fact, when I've had it in galleries, that really intense part, like, it's probably what, 45? That's just like it gets really kind of anxiety provoking, and then it calms down, and then it starts over again. So it's kind of an audio metaphor of how life is. So this is early on, but not the beginning. You can turn it down now.
Turn down.
Yeah, so that's a little clip of it. And, oh, it's coming up on the crazy furniture probably. Any questions? I think that's really what I wanted to say about this word.
The heartbeat that you have in the recording,
Yeah.
Was that actually a heartbeat, or was it a simulated heartbeat?
It is a real heartbeght. I was going to use my own, and it got too complicated to use a stethoscope. So yeah, I ended up just using a heartbeat. But it's a real heartbeat.
So you said you teach. Do you teach at a college or?
I used to. My favorite group is high school students and kids at risk, and I've taught those classes a lot. I taught for 6 or 7 years in Seattle Antioch University. We're continuing. I was in the program where people return to finish their bachelor's. So it's kind of the adult version of the kids I had. You know, people that have not done things in a very predictable way, and need like an alternative to that.
And where else do you exhibit your pieces? Just in the Seattle area, or?
Yeah, I show primarily in the Seattle area. I have shown, I've done, actually, travel is a really important part of my practice, and I used to be a partner in a gallery, a collective, and we had a visitor from Sweden, and we started an exchange with them. So there was a gallery in Sweden that we started trading. So people from our gallery would go there, and they would come here. And so I showed there at a place called Candyland. And I have done some teaching at Glass Furnace in Turkey. I was an assistant there, and I went to Guatemala with my daughter to learn how to weave. So when I start projects, my work is very research based, and I tend to travel a lot in order to talk with people and to kind of deepen the cultural awareness of what I'm working on. I actually have I have residencies coming up in Ireland, and I'm super excited. I'll be there in the spring. And I'm starting a new project where I'm interviewing older women about the good old days, and I'm going to be there talking with a couple elderly women there, so I'm excited about that.
How old is elderly?
They have to be older than me. Well, I'm really looking for people 80 years old.
Gotcha.
With thinking about like what was it like in the 40s and 50s, and I mean, yeah, in those times, I think that's what people call the good old days. I'm not quite sure. I'm kind of looking for that. Like, what is that exactly?
Well, these are supposed to be the good old days, you know that.
We're in the times of our lives.
Yeah, this part of our lives are supposed to be the good old days.
Yeah, but they're the good new days.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your grandmothers and the heritage and how your heritage or how other cultures, like their heritage, influences your work?
Well, I guess one thing that makes me think about is this project that I was just talking about is actually inspired by a personal collection I have of hats from my grandmother. She was a milliner, and so it started out as I have these beautiful hats, what can I do with them? And I'm going to be casting some of them in bronze, and then if you do that, the hat's gone. So then how do I document that hat? So I'm doing these drawings of these hats, and then that connected somehow to this idea of the good old days, because people just don't wear hats anymore. So I guess that's an example of my lineage inspiring new work.
Yeah.
If that's what your question was.
I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So what is your lineage? What country? Countries, probably.
Primarily Irish and Scottish and
Yeah.
French. Yeah.
A couple of things.
Mm-hmm.
My two questions right now would be the other artists, women that you found in your family who were artists besides the grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly was an artist. If you could tell us anything about more of them, because
Okay.
I'm sure they were there.
Mm-hmm.
And why you chose your installation to have the pelvis presented in like missionary pose rather than the other way. I mean,
Any other way.
any other way. One out of four, right? There's 4 different sides,
So-
sort of a square shape. But I was just curious why you chose this posture for it rather than another.
I'm not sure this is a missionary pose. It might be standing in your head or something. But
This would be laying on your back.
okay. Well, I will.
I was
If you look
curious.
at it from the other side. No, the hips are started there.
Standing in your head.
Yeah, if you're standing on your head. That's where
Regardless,
you're
the answer to the question is that this is
The most stable.
stable
Yeah.
position
Yeah.
for me to, I had a pelvic bone and I was playing with it and trying to decide
Yeah, this is it.
and decided that this would give me the least trouble.
It feels like you'd be giving birth to the,
Yeah.
to the world.
Yeah.
I think that's really cool.
Right. That's right.
I think it's kind of cool having the holes to look through as you look up.
Yeah.
And your other question about
Yeah, you're
lineage and artists,
Yeah,
I
right.
actually it's really interesting. I mean, my daughter is a musician, my
Right.
other one tap dancer. We have a long lineage of artists. My great aunt started the Detroit City Ballet. My aunt was a painter. My grandmother was a painter. My grandfather did pinstriping on old cars. So it's like there's a definite line, and what's interesting too is that primarily that line goes. I was tracing that line, and it went back to a Salem witch. So my 13th great grandmother was in jail, and when they were supposed to let everybody out, her jailer did not release her, and she died in jail after she should have been released. So then there was a court case, and there was compensation.
amazing.
Anyways, yeah.
Amazing history.
It was funny to, just because I saw the year she died, I thought, huh. And then I Googled her, and it took me to the witch trials, and I was like, wow. So,
That's so interesting. So many creative, out-of-the-box people in your line. It's a really beautiful heritage. Can be also a troubled heritage, but it's
Yeah.
a beautiful heritage. Yeah.
it's definitely an emotional line.
Yes. Well, the Scotch Irish, you have to
Yeah.
have a pretty power-packed
Yeah.
bit there, right? Thank you.
Question.
Yeah.
So would you say with people coming in to look at the work with the combination of the two, is it sort of like a moment that they can reflect on their own heritage or their own lineage, or is it about the birthing process, or is there something that you want people to get from this, or is it just
Beautiful.
The way that I approach that, like what is my intention and what is the viewer's experience, is that like I said before, I like to create a window so that anybody can access it in some way, but I also like to build in a lot of levels. Sometimes so many that I kind of make myself crazy and confuse people. But those levels give an opportunity for people to go deeper if they want to dig. And I wouldn't ever really say what I want people to come to with this. I think my most important, or my most fulfilling part is if it speaks to somebody. So, and it's going to speak to different people in different ways. So, certainly the lineage aspect of it, and this idea of eternity and the existential questions are what my work's about. But if somebody's looking, I've had people in the medical profession walk in and they immediately go, pelvic bone. So people will look at it differently depending on what their own experience is, and that's good. I mean, I really find it interesting when people, share their insights that are new to me with my work. I find that really intriguing. So,
do you find that in your looking at it, is it the wedding dresses sort of representing your foremothers? Was that your idea, or?
well, I was thinking about this idea of maiden names, and then I was doing that, and there was this combination. I mean, I can't really tell you the line of thought, but I can tell you the pieces that went into it.
Yeah.
So so I was thinking about the maiden names and how when people get married, they give up that past, and then I had this idea of kind of losing something, so like this ghost thing, and then I was thinking about this whole matrimony and the celebration and the occasion around marriage, and I was at the same time trying to think about, I want to do this pelvic bone, and I want to cover it with some fabric, and I want to keep it kind of ivory, and then I just thought, oh, somehow it just all made sense to me that would be what I could go after. And then there's, it's like quilts. Of course I have like tons of old family quilts, because of course my family made quilts.
Of course.
And so this to me is kind of a quilt of people's experience, and
Thank you.
I think I see some last names, and are those maiden names or are they the married names?
These are all maiden names.
Maiden names.
Yeah.
And the other question that I have is, has this been exhibited elsewhere?
Yeah, I haven't talked about methods, so there's very few places where you can show this kind of work. Very few. And this is how I work. So I'm always looking for it. It's usually some nonprofit space. Commercial galleries don't want to show this kind of work because it's really hard to sell. So I was gallery sitting for Pratt Fine Arts, which is a nonprofit arts center in Seattle that does classes and you can rent shop time. And I was talking to two friends that were also involved in it. Anyways, the three of us, all sculptors, decided we should start our own collective, but we didn't want to do a traditional co-op. And I was really inspired by the Candyland experience, because that was the collective that's in Sweden that I went to that I was talking about. So they are made up of a group that aren't all artists. And the artists that are involved very rarely show, if they show at all, there. And what it is it's just a group of people coming together to create a space for exciting, different kinds of alternative art to happen. And so we decided, let's do a space just for sculpture, because sculpture just doesn't get shown enough. And so the three of us, one of our triangle is a builder, and so there was a big basement that was available, and he ended up taking a lease on it and building it out, and he rents out the other studios. And in the front we have this little gallery called Method Gallery. And we started, after about a year of shows and seeing what worked in the space, we decided we really needed to become specifically an installation gallery, because that's what worked the best. It wasn't quite big enough to show multiple sculptures, but so people come in and they do like one statement, and so this has been shown one other place, and it was at Method. That's where I showed it.
And Method is located where?
It's in Seattle in Pioneer Square, and if you know where For Culture is, we're right next door, we're just behind it. There's a basement kind of right behind For Culture, in the Toshiro Kaplan building. And I have a show opening there March 1st. And I've been involved, somebody was asking me where else I show. I just had a huge show, well, I was part of a huge show at a museum of Northwest Art, and it's called Surge, and it was all about global warming's impact on the Skagit Valley. And they partnered artists and scientists through something called art science speed dating. And so we got to know each other, and I partnered with a scientist, and I did a huge body of work on the impacts of salinity on our natural water system. And so I was really fortunate at Museum Northwest Art. They gave me the whole Benaroya room, so I did 3 big installations there. And part of that is traveling, it's in Tacoma now, and part of it's going back to Method. And then, so I have this one ghost meadow, which is when, in the estuaries, when the saltwater meat has been there, you know, because barnacles are the canary in the coal mine, and it's kind of ground zero for where the waters meet. And so I created a ghost marsh, which is 300 pieces of wire grass that I dipped in paper pulp and covered with barnacles, and they're growing out of sand and salt. And so that marsh will be my installation, but then I'm going to build a big tidal wave that comes through out of fabric coming into the room. So that's my next project.
I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
I see the core. Are these lit from within?
Yes.
So at nighttime they're
Yeah.
going to glow?
Yeah, they look really different at night.
You can see the little room LED.
Well, yeah, that's what I wanted to know then.
And the other day you had mentioned that these names would be shadowed onto the walls. Is that what's going to happen with those?
So there's usually when I present my wire work, one of the I would say one of the most important things are the shadows. In fact, when I had these names up originally, what was so interesting was that the shadows were almost more predominant than the names themselves, which I thought was a great metaphor for this. So we were trying to balance between keeping it dark in here so that these were really like standing out, and putting some light on those. So when the sun's out, like yesterday, there were beautiful shadows on that wall, and then on this wall, even though the wall's dark gray, it was the same thing. Actually, the wire over there lit up golden. It was really amazing. But those are both subtly lit at night, as to not take away from this. But they are lit so that if you were walking by, you could take the time to see them.
How long will this be?
June?
Okay.
Very cool.
Yes.
Thank you.
I love the names. I find that just enthralling.
It's interesting, you were saying that you're hoping to get a window of time and that other people will take different things from it. And, my daughter, who's 11, was only here for a few moments. And I've been getting home so late, so I didn't get to talk to her, but I talked to her this morning a little bit and asked her what her take was. And she said that she felt that she didn't get the pelvic bone, she saw a butterfly, and that butterflies go through changes, and the way people who get married go through changes. And I said, well, what do you think about the names? And she said, well, those are people from the past who aren't here, and that's a change too. So different people take different things,
Yeah.
which is pretty cool.
Depending on what you bring yourself to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My daughter's best friend had spent some time at the gallery, and later on I was talking with her and I said something about the pelvic bone, and she said, what pelvic bone? And I was like, oh. And I said, what did you see? And she said, I just saw this beautiful form. I was like, oh, okay, that's all right too then. But the butterfly, that actually has come up a few times. So that's an interesting thing because it ties in, and that's just coincidence.
That's what I was, when it was just all wires, I was
Yeah.
noticing that the
Yeah.
other day, it looked like a butterfly.
Yeah.
And, yeah, so I think that they kind of go together
Mm-hmm.
in that meaning, yeah.
So how long does it take to put this whole thing up or take it down? It's faster taking it down.
It's a lot faster taking it down, thank goodness, because I'm going to be in Ireland. Thank you, Peter. Well, it took a solid 2 days. I would say that's 3 regular work days. Just
Maybe a little more.
set the room up, yeah.
Now, I saw the armature without the wedding dresses.
Oh, nice.
Do you have done it often enough that it's all marked where the pieces go and you can just kind of put it together?
It is all marked. The first time I took it apart, I had my daughter painstakingly take blue tape and put it on each side and register it and put a number. And then I actually ended up taking all that tape off because when I just put it together to make sure I knew how to do it again because it had been a couple of years, and I saw that the blue tape was showing through the dresses, so I went through and took all that off. That was one few-hour project when I first got here. So now it's marked with one side silver, one side's gold, Sharpie.
Well, I tell you, as you get older, you think about your hips and all this stuff. So that's, I think the old people really recognize it.
Yeah.
That's my 2 cents.
Well, I think my husband does genealogy for people, and we're Irish and Scottish, and he's often said how many people on this island are actually related, and they have no clue. I mean, he was at the club working out, and he was talking to one of our friends, Amy Harold, and they were talking genealogy, and she said, "Oh yeah, William Bradford was one of my relatives, Massachusetts." And Dick said, "Wait a minute," and it turns out they're definitely related.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I think I don't think it's, I think that the climate is similar here, and that definitely is a part of it. I have so many friends from Ireland that have moved to Seattle. There's a big Irish community in Seattle. And yeah, I've always kind of felt like there was a connection. I mean, the first time when I went to Scotland, I realized this is a lot like the Pacific Northwest. There's just things about it.
Yeah, and there's a book that's very interesting. It's called White Trash.
Oh yeah.
And it's just been written this last year, and it's about the people who came from Ireland, Scotland, and England who were indentured, and some of them were actual white slaves, and how many of those were Scottish,
Yeah.
Irish,
The clearances.
and how they migrated or ran away from their owners, etc., and ran west. So, we have an interesting history that
Yeah.
a lot of people don't think about.
Is that part of the Highland clearances you're talking about?
No,
No.
a lot of these people were just so poor.
Yeah.
And you read that, and you think about about slavery, and you always think black. If you read even the Pilgrims brought over indentured slaves, and sometimes they would work it so that these indentured people never got out of their slavery. They couldn't buy themselves out. They would just re-up it. So a lot of them ran away, and then you find those people in your lineage because they came out here, came as far as they could.
Yeah.
So it's it's interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Well, none of us are trashy, except maybe me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I have one more. I'm so sorry.
That's
I noticed that there are just an extraordinary amount of Marys.
Oh, I know. It's
Extraordinary.
crazy.
How many names are in this?
Well, right here there's 150.
And how many are Marys? Do you remember?
No, but there's a ton of Marys.
Every place you look,
And
there's a Mary.
Maries.
There's an
Marie,
answer.
yeah. They're all different forms of Mary.
Right, exactly. It's just phenomenal. Everywhere you look, there's a Mary.
Well, there's a Nancy. There's a Rebecca next to Nancy. So you have to walk around, girl.
I can see probably 6 or 7 Marys from here.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, there's a lot of Marys
Awesome.
and Maries. And the other thing is that there's a ton more Marys because the lines I can't chase are the Irish ones because you could explain that. But there's, there's a lack of documentation. The French, I have an inordinate number of French names because they're so well documented. And I tied into there's a professor from Montreal that our lineage is hooked up, and he had done all this, so it took me back to the 1500s.
Oh, what a gift. Yeah, and the Scottish are directly, I mean, that's,
Well, I was gonna
when
ask
I was in
you-
Scotland, people in Scotland don't go to Britain for their vacations, they go to France. Because there's so many connections with France and Scotland. Oh, and Bonnie Prince Charles.
What's that?
Bonnie Prince Charles. Culloden, that was all French.
All you have to do is watch.
Outland. There you go. Fascinating.
You learn all about sex, actually.
Mary, how, the names that you have here, are these ones that stretch all the way back to the 1500s then, or?
So
or is
the
it
only
just a
ones
part?
that I only did female lineage, so there's no, like my father's lineage isn't here, or I was trying to stick with female. Yeah.
Which is good.
I mean,
We are strong. We just have to be heard.
Yeah, well, we still run things even if we're not heard.
True enough.
So are we excused?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're excused.